I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Russell Targ, a physicist, author, and pioneer in the development of the laser and co-founder of the remote viewing lab at Stanford Research Institute, which investigated psychic abilities in the 70s and 80s. His work in the psychic area has been published in Nature, the Proceedings of the Institute of Electronic and Electrical Engineers, and the Proceedings of the American Association in the Advancement of Science. Russell is the author or co-author of 9 books dealing with the scientific investigation of psychic abilities and Buddhist approaches to the transformation of consciousness. As a senior staff member at Lockheed Missile Systems and Space Command, he developed airborne laser systems for the detection of wind shear and air turbulence. Having retired in 1997, he now writes books on psychic research and teaches remote viewing worldwide. So, Russell, welcome, sir. Today
Ver-
we are discussing your latest book, your new book, Eye Spies, Learn Remote Viewing from the Masters, which is a companion to the 2018 documentary Eye Spies, directed by Lance Mungia. So let me start out by asking what inspired you to write this book and how does it differ from what was described in the documentary film?
Well, our film was very successful and is still playing on television sets near you. We talk about the work we did at SRI, principally for the decade that I was there. And I wanted to make a additional contribution to explain how we do remote viewing. So I wanted to give people an opportunity to read something, find a partner, and learn remote viewing, which is a natural ability. Remote viewing is an ability we all have to quiet our minds and describe and experience what's going on at a distant place, in the distance or in the future. And this distant place can be blocked from ordinary perception by time or distance. So the main thing that we learned is that it's no harder to describe something thousands of miles away, like Soviet Siberia, than it is across the street in Palo Alto. Similarly, it's no harder to describe what the stock market is going to do next week than it is to describe the playing card that's hidden in front of you. So looking into the future is no harder than looking into the distance.
Hmm. Okay, so I want to back up just a sec. The book then is a mixture of history, and you sent me an advanced copy of it that I've been reading through. It's a mixture of history, which is very important to understanding how this all came together, as well as instructional material, which you described. And so this is going to teach people how to do remote viewing. Um, and what I wanted to point out is that what you're teaching is actual remote viewing as developed by Ingo Swann and the staff at SRI, right?
That's right. And it describes how it is that a physicist gave up laser work to move into a field as obscure and occult as psychic ability. Why would I do a thing like that?
Well, why would you do a thing like that? Actually, that's an excellent question.
Well, I've been interested in magic my whole life. I grew up with magic tricks, magic stores available to me in Chicago as a little child. And then then I went to New York and I was able to watch magicians in front of me doing close-up magic and buy magic tricks from the same place they bought their magic tricks. So by the time I was 14, I was on stage doing magic, which is really a combination of sleight of hand and hypnosis. That is, I have a favorite trick, which the effect, as we say in the magic business, the effect is I give you a deck of cards, you shuffle it, you choose a card of your choice, give it back to me, and my partner in the front row tells you what your card is. So that's basically an impossible trick. Your experience is that you freely chose a card. You're mistaken in that impression, but that's a combination of my directing your thoughts or guiding your thoughts. Hypnosis would be too strong to say, and sleight of hand. But that's the essence of magic is misdirection and some amount of hypnosis. And I got to be very good at that. I was, even as a child, I was never caught forcing a card, which is basically what this is all about. And I was very familiar with the work that was really going on, the real researchers were doing. I was just a high school student, but I knew what was going on in the laboratory, the people who were really trying to learn about psychic abilities. And by the time I was a senior laser guy and had built a 1,000-watt laser, which is the most powerful laser in the world at that time, 1972, I decided I could cash in my chips now. I had worked for NASA, I'd worked for CIA doing laser stuff, and I had a ESP teaching machine, a small gadget that offers feedback and reinforcement and takes advantage of the brain's plasticity to give you feedback when you're choosing the right target. And I showed that to Werner von Braun at a NASA conference, and he did very, very well with this ESP game. And he took me over to Jim Fletcher, who was the director of NASA, and they agreed to let me start a program at SRI if I could get if they'd hire me. And what I'm looking for now is my
So Werner von Braun was actually involved in the
yes.
genesis of this program.
So this is what the game looks like, and that's available on your iPhone right now. The four choice trainer. Of course, when I went to a conference at NASA in 1972, Apple didn't exist, neither did telephones. But I had a carry around box, which was a four choice trainer, and it just happened that von Braun is a natural psychic person, in addition to being a rocket genius and a Nazi. He was also very, very psychic. And as I was talking to him and Jim Fletcher, along comes Edgar Mitchell, who just returned to the moon and was cooperating with SRI on a futures program. And he said, yes, I can take you to Charlie Anderson, the president of SRI, and together with Hal Puthoff, who became my partner, Mitchell and I and Puthoff convinced Charlie Anderson that he should let us start a program at SRI. So it was really the confluence of von Braun doing excellently with my machine, Edgar Mitchell walking up at the moment we needed an SRI connection, and my meeting Hal Puthoff earlier that week as he lectured at Stanford. So that all put together, and we were able to start a program. That was 1972. So Hal and I came into SRI as physicists. We were both known for our work in laser physics. So we weren't scary people showing up in bed sheets, but we were published authors, well known in lasers, so we were not a big risk. My only condition is that if I join you, I don't want you to draft me to do laser work. I'm going to need some introductory overhead money to get started, together with the money NASA gave us. And shortly, Uri Geller showed up, and we then had some money from the CIA to test Geller. So between the teaching machine and Uri Geller, we had a program at SRI in 1972.
Okay. Well, so let me interject there. There's a missing element here too, which is Ingo Swann. And this is a name, and I'm certainly not the most familiar with remote viewing, but when I hear remote viewing, Ingo Swann comes up again and again and again. And from what I understand, he helped really develop the original remote viewing techniques, right? And then you'd
Yes.
mentioned Uri Geller as well. And in the 1970s, I know Geller was incredibly popular for bending spoons. But from what I understand, he also had a number of other abilities or talents as well, right?
Yeah, Geller was quite psychic in a telepathic way, and we did a lot. our first paper published in Nature was with Geller doing high quality mental telepathy. And my value in that program is as a magician, so that I was not likely to be fooled by another magician trying to fool me. So when we had pictures drawn by a third party, they were put in envelopes, kept in the safe of the management. When I wanted to do an experiment with Geller, they would issue me a sealed envelope with a picture inside, and I would sit with Geller and say, I have a picture in this envelope. Can you tell me about it? He did that very excellently. So I have no doubt that Geller has telepathic abilities along with a lot of other people.
Okay.
Now, in the beginning, Hal and I were doing physicist kind of experiments. There's something in the box. Can you tell us what it is? There's something on the wall in the next room. Can you tell it is? And Ingo said, I can focus my attention anywhere on the planet. Why would I want to look into the next room to see a picture? If I want us to go into the next room, I'll open the door. Why don't you guys just go hide anywhere in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'll describe where you are. So in one sentence, that's the invention of remote viewing. That he took us out of the box, took us away from guessing. And it turns out that the idea of describing where a person is hiding, what it looks like, is an excellent target. It has wonderful feedback possibilities. It's a rich target, and it's something that people can do readily. So one of the questions that we can follow in this program, I don't know how ESP works, unfortunately, but we were anomalously successful in our program at SRI. During my decade, sitting up in my office with a comfy chair and a gray table, I had all sorts of people come by who want to see something psychic. When it was from the military, they would offer us money. I had people right up to the Undersecretary of Defense, which is Walter LaBerge. He came from the Pentagon, and he said, can you get Ingo to show me something? And I said, oh, I could, but I never have psychics do demonstrations, because if Ingo describes some wonderful thing for you and it's correct, you'll go back to Washington trying to figure out how the trick was done. Instead, Hal and your adjutant, your major, has gone to hide somewhere in the Bay Area. And I never know I can ask the viewer anything because I don't know anything. So no way. The strength of what we did at SRI is that I'm a very helpful guide in helping to quiet the guy, get his acquiescence and agreement. And because I don't know the answer, I'm free to say to him whatever I want to say, because I know that they've gone someplace in the San Francisco Bay Area, and that's what the viewer knows also. So I have no critical information that I can pass on. So I would tell LaBerge in this case, you and your major are hiding somewhere. Yes, I know you don't believe in this. Why don't you close your eyes and just tell me what surprising images appear? Those are the magic words. Don't name it. Don't try and guess. Just what's surprising, what's new when you close your eyes, and we'll take you there and show it to you. And he did very well. And the outcome of that is the Army program. The Army was very embarrassed having to come to SRI when they wanted to find the kidnapper or the downed airplane. They wanted their own program. So having LaBerge give our program the okay that we knew what we were doing made it possible for us to go to their gymnasium and choose 6 people from the floor of the gym to work on our program. So I'm always a playmaker here. So each week they sent me a new guy or girl, and I would sit with him. and say, Hal has gone to hide somewhere with your major, Scotty Watt. None of us know where they are, but can you tell me what you're experiencing with regard to where they are? What's new? What shows up in your awareness? And it just happened the first guy I chose, and the first guy who showed up was Joe McMoneagle, who is now probably the leading remote viewing in America. Just happened that he was in the Army. He was willing to bet his career that he could learn remote viewing. And it would be wrong to say that I was his teacher and he was a brilliant student. He showed up. He just didn't know about remote viewing. He wasn't doing that. It occurred in his life. The reason I chose him is that as I interviewed each of the people, I asked, what brings you here? What happened in your life that makes you want to mortgage your Army career as an officer and come do psychic stuff in California? Joe's experience was that he was embarking in Vietnam. He saw a big yellow airplane taking him home. And in fact, after his duty was up, with Air America that took him home, which was a big yellow 747. So he remembered that from his earlier experience.
Well, so if it's okay, let me jump in again. So Uri Geller, you'd said, was telepathic. And again, I think it's incredibly valuable that you had this long background with stage magic. As you've said, that helps you identify tricks, it helps you identify deception and sleight of hand, things along those lines. Uri Geller was telepathic. Ingo Swann was the real deal, right? And Joe McMoneagle was the real deal. These are legendary figures now. Joe was also very well known. I've heard that name before. So these people are what they've been said to be then. Would that be fair?
Yes, along with Pat Price, who was probably the most psychic person we ever met. And Hella Hammond was my old friend, the photographer, had never done this before. And she was statistically the most psychic person to take part in our program, even though she was brought in as a control. So you never know who you're going to get. So my idea is that remote viewing is way easier than people think it is. And it's the job of the interviewer, which is my job, to set the stage so the person is willing to unfold their hidden ability.
So as I understand things, then the work that you started at SRI got transferred over through SAIC into Project Stargate, which was in the Army, and that was in 1978. So it was about 6 years later.
No,
right?
no, but and I left the program in 1982 as it became more and more operational. I had experiments I wanted to do. In a nutshell, I wanted to measure the accuracy of remote viewing as a function of time. We know for a fact that it's independent of distance and pretty much independent of time. And I wanted, as a scientist, I wanted to measure whether it's harder to look a week into the future than a day into the future. And they said, we're here to find out what the DIA wants, and you do that. And I said, no, that's not. I didn't grow up to be a spy for the CIA, so I left SRI, and I then formed Delphi, which used remote viewing to forecast the silver futures, and that made it all the way to the Wall Street Journal when we made $250,000 strictly forecasting things psychically.
Well, yeah. So you mentioned the operational aspect of this, and I definitely want to come back to Delphi in a bit. But
let's correct the other things. So I left at 82. Hal left at 85 when he got a grant to start a scientific lab in Houston. And with myself gone and Hal's gone, the money when they lost Hal and me, SRI lost interest in doing the program.
Yeah.
So Ed May, who is another physicist, took the program to SAIC, but that was 1985.
Okay. Okay. Um, so in the book, you've described, and again, this is the operational aspect of it, what it was actually used by the military for, finding hostages taken by Hezbollah in Lebanon,
Well,
narco trafficking.
the hostage we found was taken by the Iranian students shortly after they were taken. Well, we were asked by a Navy intelligence officer to describe the person in the envelope that they've just given us. I was working with Keith Harari, who's another lifetime psychic. So the Navy guy came to me and said, "Here's somebody in an envelope. This is an emergency situation. We need to know what you can tell me about the person in the envelope." So I sat down with Harari then and there in a quiet room, and he said, "This is a man who's very sick. He's really dying. He can hardly walk. He's in a dark place, and I don't know what's the matter with him, but he looks like he's near death. But as I look at him, he seems to be moving out of that place into the light and walking. So it looks like in some short period of time, he's going to be out of this dark place and into the light." That's what I see.
Mm.
So we took that to the Navy guy, and 3 days later, we learned that Richard Queen, who's the assistant ambassador to Iran, was released because he developed multiple sclerosis, and he was at death's door. And 2 days later, they took him out. The Iranians released him, and he flew to Germany, received help, and lived for a number of years subsequently.
Oh, okay. Well, so in addition, the team, they looked for narcotics trafficking. They looked at Chinese nuclear tests, remote viewing inside of the Kremlin, and a number of other military objectives as well,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah.
And Ingo's the one who did the Chinese nuclear test, and that's again, each of these things is interesting in its own way. CIA came and asked me and Ingo if we could describe what's going to happen at these coordinates 3 days from now. So Ingo said, "I need some colored pencils. This is a very artistic, interesting place. It looks like 4th of July. There are all sorts of streamers going off in the sky. Very beautiful, big explosions, and a line of trucks in the background." Now, that's all we knew at the end of that day. 3 days later, they came back and said Ingo really did great. What he described was a Chinese atomic bomb test that did take place 3 days later, and it failed. And we knew it was going to fail because what Ingo described was the burning of uranium in the air. Uranium is a pyrophoric material like other things that burn very, very brightly, but it doesn't explode. So streamers in the air at this bomb test, we knew they were going to test something, but as soon as Ingo started talking about fireworks and streamers, we knew that it was going to fail, and in fact, it did fail. So Ingo was able to describe with full feeling and color what was going to happen 3 days in the future.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, again, I want to thank you again for the advanced copy of the book. And I should mention to the audience that there are dozens of detailed examples of remote viewing success stories that are in there. Now, I'm wondering what comes to mind in terms of the absolute best success stories. Do you have any that showcase how well this can work when it works well?
Oh, yes, my pleasure to do that. I want to you mentioned at the beginning that Ingo showed us how to do remote viewing, which is quite true. That Hal and I were doing stupid little physics experiments, look in the box, and Ingo said that's a waste of time. And what Ingo taught us is that what you have to help a person do is learn to separate the psychic signal from the mental noise. You have to improve the signal to noise ratio. And the noise is caused by memory and imagination and guessing and game naming. And you've got to give up your desire to name what the thing is. And as an interviewer, it's my job to make sure that he understands that. Don't name anything. All I want to know is what you're experiencing. And the idea that you have to give up all the analytical aspects of naming, guessing, and grasping is not a new idea.
You know, let me apologize for interrupting, but I did a while ago, I did an interview with Dr. Deepak Chopra. And one of the things that he described was basically he'd said that the human mind has been evolving, and these abilities presumably evolving with it, for many millions of years. Language is very new. And one of the things that he described with when he described prophecy, and he described like Buddha and other great figures along those lines, he said that they step outside of labels and language. He said that language puts us in a tiny little box and we can't see outside of it. We can't use these abilities. He said once you move past language, past naming, as you've just mentioned, there's something greater there that we can tap into, that we evolved from. Does that kind of sound like it aligns with
That's
what you're
all
saying?
true. So can you see a picture of a Hindu guy on the door behind me wearing a shawl?
Yeah.
Sure you can. Well, his name is Padmasambhava, and he wrote a book called Self-Liberation Through Seeing with Naked Awareness. And he wrote this nice book 1,200 years ago. And he introduced the idea that our nature is timeless awareness. Who we are has the ability to move through time, through space. And in order to be free to do that, we have to give up our desire to name and grasp onto the things that we experience. So he was already aware 1,200 years ago that naming and grasping is the enemy of timeless awareness. And he said, but your timeless awareness, your timelessness that your consciousness has means that your consciousness is free of cause and effect, because you're free to move through time unhindered. So this is a very amazing conversation 1,200 years ago, before Newton or having the idea of time and velocity or anything like that. He already knew that you were free of the cause and effect.
Okay, so language, in a way, language and naming, that's one of the things that holds us back, and that makes sense. It's a very new development, you know, in the history of the human race. It allows us to communicate, it allows us to conceptualize, it allows us to do a great many things, but at the same time, it makes sense that it would limit our innate abilities. Now,
You
in
wanted me to
addition,
tell you about one of my favorite
yes, please, please.
things. I was working with and I have to look up. He has a tough Israeli name, Yakir Aranov, the toughie, but he's a well-known Israeli physicist who'll probably get a Nobel Prize one of these days. He was brought in by our laboratory director as somebody who didn't believe in ESP and was a very astute experimentalist and couldn't be fooled. So the lab director in hell would choose a random place to hide, and he would leave me with Yariv. And my job was to Aronoff. His name is very much like a famous physicist, with those two names exchanged, which is my problem.
Ah, okay.
Anyway, his proper name is Aronoff. We'll call him Aronoff. So he was sitting with me, and I said, "Well, Bob and Hal have gone to hide somewhere. I, of course, don't have no idea where he is. I'd like you to quiet your mind and just tell me what's surprising that appears." And he says, "I don't know about you, Russ. When I close my eyes, it's dark. Nothing appears." So I chatted with him for the next 20 minutes, and I said, "Well, we've got to do something for them. Here, you've got a pad and pencil. Our lab director and your friend Hal have gone to hide somewhere. Let's pretend you saw something. Let's pretend this is a psychoanalytical experiment. I just want you to free associate what surprising shows up in your awareness. What could you make up?" And he said, "Well, I see a damn duck walking across the road. Reminds me of my mother's farm in Israel where she raises ducks." And I said, "Well, that's very interesting. I don't know anything about that. Could you draw what you see?" And by this time, they had gone to the duck pond in Palo Alto. That showed them randomly. Yaakov looked into his mind, and the duck showed up, and he got to see the ducks 20 minutes later. So that would, I say, is typical of skeptics and army people who came into my lab. That is, they don't believe it, they don't see anything, they close their eyes, it's dark, and it's up to me to get them to go along with the game and make up something, tell me something. Now, I described this once to the American Hypnotic Society. I was invited to talk to them. And I described pretty much what I've told you. And I said, we don't use any, no drugs, no psychedelics, no flashing lights, no hypnosis. At which point the whole place cracked up and said, one of the guys stood up and said, "What you've described to me is what we do for a living. That's called hypnosis. That you sit in front of somebody, give them instructions to do something they don't know how to do, and then they do it. That's what we mean by hypnosis. So you're doing your audience a disservice if you insist that there's no hypnosis involved." Now, all the people who are involved in teaching remote viewing or involved, so forth, are very much against the idea of hypnosis because it sounds like mind control.
Yeah.
And neither I nor the viewer feel that they're involved in mind control, but the interviewer has significant responsibility for setting the stage and making the impossible seem possible.
Well, so let me change tack a little bit. 2 weeks ago, again, the timing is very interesting. I just saw this article the day before I talked to you. 2 weeks ago, there was an article in Foreign Policy entitled "Russia is Afraid of Western Psychic Attacks." And it stated that Putin and the Kremlin are concerned about things like remote viewing and remote influence. Should they be concerned?
Well, they should be concerned about remote viewing. The army was concerned about. We got money as a result of Pat Price being targeted at something near the Fort Meade, the NSA, National Security Agency, listening post at Sugar Grove. All these weird names are from 50 years ago. We just celebrated the 50th anniversary of remote viewing at SRI. So I have a picture behind me of myself and Hal Puthoff today and 50 years ago. So we were happy that we could celebrate. We're both alive to celebrate the beginning of remote viewing, and we had a couple of hundred people who now make a living either doing remote viewing or teaching remote viewing. So the ability has caught on. Now, you were asking me something different.
Well, yeah, I was asking you,
Oh, the Kremlin.
yeah,
Yes,
the foreign policy article was written, a little bit tongue in cheek, and to be honest, and I'll ask you about this in a moment, but when I read that, I thought, well, maybe there are valid reasons why they are concerned about that. I mean, do they have reason to worry about remote viewing?
Well, the beginning of the CIA, we were Pat Price was set to a log cabin in the hills near Sugar Grove. On his psychic way there, he passed over the army base at Fort Meade, and Fort Meade is where he wanted to play at Sugar Grove, which is the NSA listening post. So he took a look at that listening post, and he realized that he guessed that that's really where he should be and not at this log cabin. So he took a trip in there and found some filing cabinets and opened the filing cabinets and found some names and came back to us and said, well, there's this very interesting, very secret place with roll-up doors, and in the basement they have all their files, and it's called Sugar Grove, and the code words there are cue ball, eight ball, and a bunch of other things like that. And we then related that to our Kit Green, who was our CIA contact, who gave us the target. Now, the reason that I'm confused is Kit Green was very confused. Everybody was confused. The target was the log cabin. Pat Price passed by the log cabin, came in at 5,000 feet, said he saw this military base and said that must be the target. So he dove in and came up with actual current code words, with top secret code words, operational code words. And we read those to Kit Green. And Kit Green said, well, I don't know anything about that. That actually wasn't the target. But if you were where you said you were at Sugar Grove, then I can find out about that. So he went with his super top secret clearance, Kit Green did, to his friend at NSA and said, do you know anything about this cue ball, eight ball, Minerva stuff? And they said, we've got to take you to security right now because those are a bunch of operational, current, top secret code words. Where the hell did you get that, Green? And he said, well, a psychic told my friends in California. So we wound up with the NSA and the CIA showing up at SRI and said, what the hell are you guys doing? This is not a game. These are important things. You can't be talking about these. Anyway, so the CIA became very worried about people looking at their desk, reading papers on the desk. So it was really Pat Price was looking into the NSA by mistake, as it were, that we alarmed the bells at CIA, and that started the program. And within a year, Hal's name and my name were on Soviet foreign technology documents that we've seen. So they were within a year. It took them a year to figure out what we were doing.
Okay, yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense.
So yes, the Soviet Union has something to worry about. If you got omniscient people wandering around, and you think you have a bunch of secrets, they're not so secret.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so I wanted to ask about the UFO topic. And the reason I wanted to ask about that is, I mean, Congress has congressional UAP inquiries. We have pilots coming forward. Whistleblower legislation was just passed. UAPs are a very current, relevant topic. Have you guys ever remote viewed UAP phenomena?
We have no good data on UAPs. I would rather answer your other question first, whether they have any worry about our harming people in the distance. And
Okay.
there is literature, principally by Russians, called Experiments in Mental Suggestion by Vasiliev. And this is one of a series of books that I published with Hampton Roads. Vasiliev did these experiments in the 1960s, 1970s, which is hypnosis at a distance. He would have somebody in his laboratory in Leningrad, and he would then go to southern Russia and try and send her a signal, and she would fall asleep when he sent her a signal to fall asleep. So that's hypnosis at a distance. William Broad in America has published a book called Distant Mental Influence about one person sitting in a laboratory, the other one sitting under TV lights, and the subject would have their brainwave and heart rate monitored, and William Broad, the experimenter, would sit in his room with watching her on a television monitor, and on a random schedule, he would try and excite her and put her to sleep. And this is called distant mental influence, and that was very successful. So he has a whole book full of experiments where an experimenter in one place can affect the physiology of a person in another place. So the answer is yes, to some extent, a distant person can affect the physiology of another person.
Okay. So there is some manner, some form of remote influence
Yeah,
then.
it's published data. William Broad at least was a very careful, successful American researcher, and Vasiliev did his work over a decade that was condensed in this nice book, Experiments in Mental Suggestion. So both of those offer significant evidence, published evidence, that the thoughts of one person can affect the physiology of a distant person. It's basically a kind of mental telepathy. If I sit here and tell you I'm sending you a picture of something, can you visualize it? And you might just say, well, I suddenly feel something good to eat. And I say, well, that's cool because I was sending you an ice cream cone. That would be generally billed as mental telepathy. On the other hand, it could be that I'm affecting your physiology because I'm causing you to salivate over your ice cream cone, which you didn't even know was in your future.
Okay.
So
Okay.
if you think that mental telepathy is real, then the evidence for distant mental suggestion is pretty strong.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and this also goes to the idea of ESP, right? Or reading minds to some degree.
Yes, mental telepathy.
Okay. Okay. And then again, to my earlier question, it sounds like you did not remote view the UAP phenomena at all. That sounds like that wasn't something that was on
That
the
was not
agenda.
part of our program. There's a lot of you had a lot of psychic people doing freelance. Inga, one day Pat Price came by with a list of 4 UFO bases, one in Alaska, one in the Pyrenees, one in the middle of Australia, and the other one somewhere else. And we passed those on to the CIA, and the CIA were very interested in those because they, to some extent, correlated with things that we were already worried about. So
Oh, okay. So you're saying that so this was a topic of interest then. So you say freelance, this was something that people had pursued on their own. And I know that they still, to this day, people still pursue this on their own. It became popular in the 90s, as I remember. Yeah, and it wasn't part of Stargate itself.
Pat Price was very interested in that, and as part of our chatter, one night I decided to have an out of body experience looking for a UFO, the natural thing for a researcher to do. And in this experience, I came across an enormous, enormous UFO, much like Jung had an out-of-body experience that he described in his book Dreams, Memories, and Reflections, where he leaves the planet and looks back at the Earth. He and has a new appreciation for life on Earth. Dreams, Memories, and Reflections. So I was having a similar situation, but I ran into this giant UFO. I was most impressed with the size. So I drifted inside, and I encountered a hallway illuminated in red light with bodies stacked up along one side, and they all had their heads under hair dryers. And then I continued down, and I began to feel frightened. I felt that I was observed. So I canceled the whole thing and came back. And the next day I told Price about that. And he said, "Oh, you found yourself into the body storage area. Luckily, you got out of there before somebody snatched your consciousness. A very, very dangerous thing." So, so that was that story. And that occurred to me. And we'll never know if I actually encountered a UFO, no way to tell. A couple of years later, I saw the 2001 famous movie, whose name you might remember or might not.
Yeah, 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Space Odyssey. So I saw that a couple of years later, and that has a scene just like what I've described to you. That has a scene where one of the astronauts goes into a huge saucer, and everybody's is sleeping because they're on their
The
way to
cryo sleep chambers
right, and there's a whole row of chambers illuminated with red light under hair dryers. So the value of that to me, that I actually don't think that I found a UFO, though you never know. But I think that I told a number of people about my interesting dream because it was so detailed. And then I got to see it a couple of years later, very much like what I experienced. So I believe that this is just my view into the future of something in my quite interesting future.
I see what you mean. Well, and that is intriguing. Actually, I had an interview scheduled just yesterday about 2001: A Space Odyssey, but unfortunately my guest had to cancel. So it's interesting that that would come up.
All right, so you have Space Odyssey all queued up.
Yeah, yeah. Russell, let me thank you again so much for your time today. And again, the book is Third Eye Spies: Learn Remote Viewing from the Masters. I will put links out in the YouTube show notes so that people can learn more about this. And you have many other books as well. Those are available on Amazon. I'll put links out to those as well. Okay, well, let me close by asking, what comes next for you? What do you see in the near future for your work and your work with remote viewing, of course?
Well, I'm interested in teaching people that remote viewing is easy to do. There's things that we did. Do we have time for a remote viewing story?
Yes, absolutely.
I was, the CIA felt that Price was too dangerous to be hanging out with the hippies in California. So they induced him to come to live in Virginia and be a day-to-day operating psychic with the CIA, which he did until he died mysteriously. But in his last week with me, we were tracking Hal Puthoff through South America, where he was on vacation. And each day, Price would say, "I see something like the church, or the volcano. I see a harbor. I see a market." And on day 5, he did not show up. So in the spirit that the show must go on, I said, I'll do it. So I took my pad and I drew an airport on an island. I don't know if you can see the airport on the island.
Yeah, I do. I see it on your
I'm
wall.
sure you can see the airport, and my drawing may or may not show. But I made a drawing amazingly congruent to that island. And the reason that we're showing is that it illustrates that even a scientist can do remote viewing. So it's so easy that even a scientist could do it, because my one-off drawing with price missing, I had to do something to fill in the square, was as good as anything we saw in the program, which makes it appear that remote viewing is not that hard to do.
Wonderful. Russell, let me thank you again so much for your time today, sir.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be with you, and I appreciate the opportunity. Bye-bye.